all the content you see about the derivation of Lorentz transformation is wrong in principle. Blasphemous, right? Be with me till the end of this video and we shall agree. Hello friends, I am Dr. Nitish. This is Intuition and today it's about the Lorentz transformations. The year is 1887. Michelson-Morley spent 3 months meticulously performing their experiment to measure the Earth's speed through ether. They found a null result. The movement through ether could not be detected. Michelson, a true experimenter, blamed his methods and means. Not sensitive enough. There was no way his null result could be correct because it ultimately implied that light, a wave, did not require a medium. He wasn't a theorist. He didn't realize that his experiment is showing the most right result of all times, proving everything else wrong. But his respect as an experimenter was formidable. Theorists were ready to accept his results, even if it led to fantastic reinterpretations. In 1889, Fitzgerald proposed one such curious solution. The movement through ether contracted matter. How much? By an amount that exactly compensates the lack of the time difference. As we saw in the last video on the MMX, the light in the parallel arm should have taken a longer time, but it didn't. In other words, it took a shorter time than expected. Shorter by this factor. Somehow the track was shortened by this factor. That is why light in the parallel arm took a time equal to the perpendicular arm. It was a crazy idea. The physics community ignored it largely, considering it an ad hoc measure, without any real explanation of why it could happen. Anyhow, in 1892, the great Hendrik Antoon Lorentz independently developed this idea of length contraction, this time with a theoretical framework. As the electromagnetic force is holding atoms together, movement through the ether makes these forces stronger and contracts everything in the direction of motion. We will derive the equations now and then we will see why they were wrong. These two friends, Alex and Ben, are in two rockets. Ben is traveling in this direction at a speed v relative to Alex. Our calculation starts when their nose positions coincide and their clocks are synchronized as 0. T is 0. T prime is 0. A photon is released at this instant that travels in the x direction with the speed c. Let the distance of this photon from Alex be x and from Ben x prime. But the speed of the photon for Alex is c and for Ben too it is c. Let us assume they have some kind of communication system that enables knowing what time the other's clock is showing and what distance the other is measuring from the photon. And they want to find an equation which correlates their findings. They want to find a constant a such that x is equal to a times x prime plus vt prime. Now x is ct and x prime is ct prime. So ct is equal to a times ct prime plus vt prime. This is the step where relativity has entered the equation. We have assumed that time passes at different speeds for Ben and Alex. That is why there is t and t prime. If we had used classical mechanics, this equation would be simply ct plus vt is equal to c plus v into t. Alex would measure his distance from the photon as the sum of his distance from Ben and Ben's distance from the photon, and he would measure the speed of the photon as c plus v. This constant a would be just 1 in that case. Moving ahead, we keep this equation as equation 1. What does Ben calculate from Alex's readings? His distance from the photon is ct prime is equal to a times ct minus vt. Keep this equation as 2. We are using one more principle of relativity here. The constant should be a for both. It should not be 1 by a or minus a. From 1, we get t by t prime is equal to a into c plus v divided by c. And from second, we get t by t prime is equal to c by a into c minus v. Equating these two, we get a into c plus v by c is equal to c by a into c minus v. Rearrange and get a square is equal to c square by c square minus v square, and then divide the numerator and denominator by c square and get this. A square is equal to 1 by 1 minus v square by c square, and then you take a square root on both sides and get a is equal to 1 by under root 1 minus v square by c square. Now put that in 1. Ct is equal to a into c plus v into t prime. The distance of the photon from Lx is a times longer than the sum of the distance between Lx and Ben and between Ben and the photon. This is the length contraction. The factor a is also called Lorentz factor and denoted by gamma. As for time, Ct is equal to gamma times Ct prime plus Vt prime, or t is equal to gamma times t prime plus Vt prime by c. And because t prime is equal to x prime by c, t is equal to gamma times t prime plus x prime v by c square. This is the equation for time dilation. Oh yes, there are two more equations. Y is equal to y prime and z is equal to z prime. This means that if there are antennas on these two rockets in the y and z direction, they will not undergo shortening because there is no velocity in those directions. They will become thinner though. These four are the world famous equations of relativity. Some people claim that Einstein used this ready-made mathematical framework in his relativity. So what's the problem here? Lorentz had hypothesized an actual physical shortening of matter on movement through ether in the direction of motion. A spherical electron actually became oblate. The correct derivation of length contraction for Lorentz relativity is by comparing the lengths in the direction of motion and perpendicular to it. Secondly, in Lorentz theory, the ether is real and motion through it changes the speed of light by the value v, the speed through ether. But the equations that we just derived are based on the constant speed of light. So the appropriate way for Lorentz was to analyze the Michelson-Morley experiment and derive gamma as the correction factor. It may look like splitting hairs, but this difference is the defining difference between Lorentz and Einstein's relativity. The two theories are mathematically equivalent. There is no way to experimentally differentiate between the two. But they are very different in principle. Lorentz theory has ether, physically affecting matter, but its detection is impossible. There is a proper length of an object when it is at rest with respect to ether. And there is a universal master clock, which is at rest with ether. This caused many complications. The prime one was this. If Lx is moving through ether, he would contract. And Ben would also contract according to his speed. But Lx and Ben's absolute lengths are not measurable. Only their ratios are, as if only their relative velocities matter. And this is why Henri Poinxare began to question the necessity of the luminiferous ether. In his influential 1902 book, Science and Hypothesis, Poinxare articulated his skepticism with a now famous quote: "Whether the ether exists or not matters little. Let us leave that to the metaphysicians. Someday, no doubt, the ether will be thrown aside as useless." The ether was getting regarded as a convenient hypothesis, a useful model for physicists, but not a physical reality. But still, completely abandoning ether was such a huge intellectual leap that it needed a younger, bolder maverick who brought a tsunami in 1905 that washed away this ancient relic. The above mentioned derivation is appropriate for Einstein's relativity, where the length contraction is apparent, depending only on the relative velocity. It cannot be observed by Ben himself, because Ben is not moving. Neither is Lx, nor is anyone else, because there is nothing absolute to move against. There is no ether. The whole physics community, tired of struggling with the ether for decades, welcomed this idea. They preferred forgetting the original question: if light is a wave, what is its medium? Lorentz appreciated Einstein's approach. It was simpler. The math had less steps and assumptions, but he could never let the ether go. How could he? What was the medium of light then? The next video would be on Einstein's relativity. Why is relativity Einstein's? when all the groundwork was already done? And which question did he leave unanswered? The real answer of the twin paradox. Subscribe, share, like, and join us in the next video about the man himself. We are laying the foundation for an intuitive understanding of relativity and eventually the twin paradox and time travel. Take care.